Welcome back to the H2O Hustle podcast, where we talk about the utility industry, water, wastewater, steam, and boiler operations, leadership, professional growth, and what it takes to continuing to develop as an operator with passion, purpose, and precision. Today, we're going to talk about a question that sounds simple, but actually has a complicated answer, and that is, how do you become a licensed boiler operator? When I started learning more about boiler operator licensing, one thing became very clear quickly, and that there is no single boiler operator license that applies everywhere in the United States. The requirements can change depending on the state, city, county, municipality, type of boiler, the operating pressure, and even the facility where you work. So today we're going to break down what boiler operator licensing actually means, how licensing requirements differ across jurisdictions, what the examination process can look like, how reciprocity works, and then we're going to bring it on home to Indiana and talk specifically about what the law says here. For me, this topic is personal because my career has taken me from water treatment and wastewater treatment into steam production and boiler operations. As I continue learning this side of the utility industry, I'm also looking at what additional training and professional credentials can help me become a more knowledgeable and well-rounded operator. So, what does it really mean to become a licensed boiler operator? Let's get into it. So, as we come to this, and as I said before, is that boiler licensing is not universal. So the first thing we need to understand is that boiler operator licensing is jurisdictional, and that means that the requirements depend on the authority having jurisdiction, sometimes called the AHJ, and that's what that is. So depending on where you work, the authority could be a state agency, a city, a county, a municipality, or a local licensing board. One state may require boiler operations to hold a state issued license, while another state may not. Even when a state does not require a statewide license, an individual city or municipality may establish its own requirements. Licensing may also depend on whether you're operating a high pressure or a low pressure boiler, the size or capacity of the equipment, the type of facility, your level of responsibility, and the amount of practical experience required. So the question is simple, not simply, do boiler operators need a license? The better question to ask is, what does the authority having jurisdiction require where I actually work? So we're going to go into some historical perspective on state licensing. And according to the historical licensing information I've reviewed, 10 states, along with the District of Columbia, were identified as requiring boiler operators to hold a license. So 10 states says that you have to have a license. And those states were Alaska, Arkansas, Iowa, Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Montana, New Mexico, Ohio, and Oklahoma, along with the District of Columbia. And the same historical information that was noted that as of 2011, that was noted in 2011, excuse me, Connecticut did not require a boiler operator license while acknowledging that requirements could change. And that date, 2011, is extremely important because we got to realize that we're in 2026 now, and regulations change, laws change, administrative rules change, licensing programs can be added, removed, or reorganized. So that's why the older textbooks and historical sources are valuable for understanding the concept and the process of licensing, but current requirements should always be verified directly with the appropriate regulatory authority. So, this list, a list that was accurate in 2011 should not automatically be treated as definitive list for 2026. And as I said earlier, starting out the show, is that you know is it was very confusing because some places say that you need a license, some places say that you don't, some states do, this state doesn't, and here and there and in between. So we have to understand that what was good in 2011 is not good for today, and things change. So um, but and that's why we understand that why different sources give different answers, and this this is where researching boiler licensing can get confusing. You may find one source saying a certain number of states requiring licensing and another source giving a much larger number, you know. So like that information that was in 2011 says 10 states. I've seen it to where it was saying there was 42 states require you to have a license out of the 50 states. And that was through another source through my research. And it's just different sites had different answers. So one reason is that different sources may be counting different things. One source may count only mandatory statewide boiler operator licenses. Another may include stationary engineer licenses. That's a different one. Or operating engineer licenses, power engineering licenses, high pressure boiler licenses, municipal licenses, or voluntary professional credentials. A state boiler operator license, a city stationary engineer license, an employer required qualification, and a voluntary professional credential are not necessarily the same thing. So, as I was just saying, these are different types of licenses for different people, and they don't mean the same thing. So, we got to understand that it's a totally different ball game when looking at how to get an operator license for a boiler operator. But so the key is, so don't stop your research at an online map or a list. Use it as a starting point, then go directly to the authority having jurisdiction. So that's where we would have to do is go to whoever has the jurisdiction and the authority, and then base our research off of that and base what we need to do off of that. So, questions to ask when researching a requirement is here's a question: is the license mandatory by law? Is there some type of federal or state law saying that you need to have this license? And if so, then you need to go through the proper channels to know that law through and through. Is it required statewide or only locally? So if it's like a local license, it's not statewide, then it's only good for that local town or that local county, but it's not good statewide. Or if it is statewide, then that's good that you can only go in that jurisdiction of that state and use that license. So that's something to note and to understand when um, wanting to get a boiler license. Does it apply to all boilers or certain pressures and capacities? So, is it a high pressure boiler that you're getting an operator license for, or is it a low pressure? Like, what kind of types of pressures and parameters in a boiler would cause a person to get licensed. That's something to keep in mind, that certain licenses, they only categorize certain things. So that's something to note. Is it an operator license? Is it an inspector license? Or is it a voluntary credential? Those are two or three different things right there. And that's something to look into and to know. And lastly, does the employer have additional qualification requirements? So, um, like for instance, where I work, um, I didn't need to get this boiler license, but my boss, he wanted to send me through this class and thought it would be, very beneficial that I'm actually at right now. I'm not actually in the class, but I'm at the hotel recording this, and but he's sending me through this class, and it's just for me to understand the ins and outs of how to operate a boiler. And this class, at the end of it, it's a week long class. I will be a certified boiler third class operator. So he's having me to go through this, and it's an additional qualification requirement. And, like I said, it's not for me to have it, but it just looks good to, if I ever wanted to move through the progression at my job, the next job title would be um, a master control operator, and it looks good to have that if I was to go for that position. But yes, it's good to have this, and some employers will send or have certain people go through these licensing exams so that they can learn and become licensed. So, in any type of licensing, if you ever want to think about moving somewhere, or, thinking about how reciprocity works, reciprocity, does a boiler license transfer? And another important issue is that reciprocity generally refers to whether one jurisdiction will recognize a license earned in another jurisdiction. But reciprocity is not always automatic. A jurisdiction may consider the class of a license you hold, the requirements you meet or met to obtain it, your years of experience, the type of size boilers you operated, and whether your original examination is considered equivalent. So, um, as I was looking up at the historical information that I was looking up about, the licensing and what states consider a boiler license or needed to get a license or not. It says, according to this information, many states that require licensing were considered out-of-state licenses, particularly when the operator had significant experience. The source also identified the state of Maine as having a specific provision involving certain qualifications obtained through the U.S. Coast Guard. The key takeaway is simple. A license that qualifies you in one jurisdiction does not automatically guarantee the same authority in another. And that's something that we got to understand in any type of licensing, but definitely here in boiler licensing. Just because you're certified in Arkansas doesn't mean you can be certified in Kansas or something like that. It's just, you have to look at the rules and the regulations and the requirements of what you need to do to become licensed in that other state. So if you're moving or changing jobs, contact the new licensing authority, document your experience, and ask about reciprocity and determine whether an additional testing is required. So, and then that's where it brings us to the next point, is who administers the exam and how exams vary. Once you determine that you need a license, the next question is who actually administers the examination. And depending on the jurisdiction, it may be a state agency that does it, or a city licensing department. They may, administer the test, or a county, or a local, or an examining board, or a contracted private testing organization. And in my case, experience, this is going through a community college, and the class that is going through this is, I believe it's of the American Society of Engineers, and um, so yes, it's going through that. I don't believe I said the whole thing right, but um, ASOEP is the acronym, and it's going through that to get licensed for this boiler license. And so we have to understand that you know the examination themselves, they can vary significantly. An exam may include multiple choice or true or false on it, fill in the blank, or essay questions. It may be written, oral, computer based, paper based, or a combination of formats. Preparation begins before you open the textbook, and preparation begins by understanding the exam you're actually preparing to take. Um, you know, some things to understand is that the exam format and number of questions, that's something, before taking the exam, you need to find out the format and the number of questions, the subjects that are covered and requiring the passing score, whether the exam is an open book or a closed book exam. Sometimes they'll give you an open book exam, but don't count on it every time. Um, you also got whether you can use calculators or formula sheets, whether there's an oral examination, identification, documentation, and fees, that kind of type of thing, what's required before taking an exam. Because, like, when people go through exams, it's like gearing up for a battle in war, or it's gearing up for a big game or something like that. Something to where you got to put a lot of energy and effort into these things, because some people's jobs on the line. If they don't get this license, or they won't get up in pay or bumps in pay, because they need to get this license to show that they're certified and qualified and they have the credentials. So these things are, they might seem very small to somebody, but they're very, very important to know, is that you have to find these things out before you take an exam. And so going back to, the general licensing process, what to do. And, step one is to research your jurisdiction. So that means to know everything about your jurisdiction, determine the state and local requirements, the type of boiler involved, the pressure classification, and the authority having jurisdiction, or the AHJ. Definitely need to know that. Step two is to determine which license you need. Titles may include boiler operator, high pressure boiler operator, third class, second class, first class, stationary engineer, operating engineer, or chief engineer, whatever the type of license you need. Research that, go for that, and understand what you need. The eligibility requirements, the minimum age, the education, the former boiler training, the hands-on experience, and the documented operating time. Like, meet those eligibility requirements so that you can um, be able to be licensed for the general process. Document your experience, your employer and job title, the dates of employment, the boiler type, the pressure, the capacity of the boiler. Document what you work around each day, what you operate, how you go about your job, and what kind of experiences you're learning, and have your supervisor verify it, and training and education, anything that they send you to, like a conference, or like in my case, like this, going through an exam preparation course, things like that, they help, because whenever you want to gain a new position, or gain the knowledge or whatever, something to help you further along, document these things. These things will help you when it's time, and something that you want to do to maybe get promoted, or just to get in a better position, or up your pay. Those things are very important. Um, so if you're gaining boiler experience right now, don't wait until you're applying for a license to try to remember everything you've done. Start documenting it now. Um, submit the application. They may require an application form, your employment verification, your training records, your fees, your identification. That's something that's important when trying to get a boiler license, and all of that is, you got to go through the paperwork, and all those things to get licensed, and to um, be prepared. And then you want to prepare for the examination. Like I said, you want to prep like it's a game day, like it's a Super Bowl. You want to prepare like it's a big event. You want to prepare for topics like boiler construction and steam fundamentals. You want to look up what combustion is, and fuels, and draft, and feed water systems, and boiler water treatment. That is probably one of the most important things I'm gonna say out of all of this before I continue on. Boiler water treatment is very, very important, because that's what helps you operate a boiler correctly. With bad water treatment, it will not run and efficiently, and it will mess things up, and create a lot of problems for a boiler operator down the road. So you want to learn those things. You want to learn about pumps and valves and safety devices and controls, startup and shutdown and emergency procedures. Then, the seventh thing that I'm talking about is that you want to pass the examination. Depending on the jurisdiction, like I said earlier, the test could be written, oral, or multiple examination sections, and you want to pass those. You want to do your best and give it your best effort and pass those so you can be a licensed operator. Obtain and maintain the license. You want to, if they got any continuing education that you got to do to keep a license, or go to a conference, or do a course, or whatever you have to do to keep the license, keep it, and do the best you can to do your due diligence to keep it, and maintain it. So, and there's different levels of boiler licensing, and like we said before, or like I said before, like I said before, is like a third class, second class, first class, senior operating engineer, and all those things. Like, you want to know those things, and to understand those things when you're getting a boiler license. You you don't want to chase the title without understanding what the credential actually represents. So keep going, keep knowing what you want to do, and that'll take you a long way. And so I've talked about, prepping for the examination, knowing what kind of position that you have and what you're going for and all those things. But as I talked before, we talked about several other states, but we want to go to the state of Indiana because that's where I am and that's where um, I want to talk about. And so we just want to bring this to Indiana because Indiana is a perfect example of why we need to understand the difference between licensing the operator and regulating the equipment. Indiana does not generally require boiler operators, not operations, to hold a state issued boiler operator license. Indiana official guidance states that Indiana statute IC 22-15-6 and the applicable administrative rules do not require licensing of boiler operators. But this is the part we have to make very clear. No state operator license does not mean no regulation. So obviously Indiana is regulated. Indiana still regulates covered boilers and pressure vessels through inspection, operating permits, safety standards, and other applicable requirements. So an inspector will come and inspect the boiler. They are to do that. So that doesn't mean that just because a person doesn't have a license doesn't mean that the inspector is not going to come and check everything out, because he is. So in Indiana, the individual operator may not be required to hold a state issue boiler operator license, but the boiler itself may be subject to inspection, permitting, and regulatory requirements. So, um, what that means is a boiler operator license. That means it's a credential belonging to the individual operator. So Indiana doesn't require that. So our boiler operating permit, that applies to the regulated equipment and is connected to inspection and compliance requirements. So Indiana does uphold that. And a boiler inspector license, that applies to qualified individuals performing regulatory inspections, and that is what an inspector does. So that is definitely something Indiana does, and so we understand that the operator, the inspector, and the operating permit are three different pieces of the regulatory picture. So the the thing I want to close with is this: is, for me personally, this is why I believe in continuing education. I spent 2 years working in water and wastewater treatment. I said 2 years. I mean, I spent years working in water and wastewater treatment, and now I'm building experience in steam production and boiler operations. A lot of that previous experience transfers directly into this field, especially water chemistry, pumps, chemical treatment, troubleshooting, operating procedures, and understanding the responsibility that comes with critical utility infrastructure. So, so even though Indiana does not generally require me to hold a state issue boiler operator license, that doesn't mean I shouldn't stop learning, and neither should you. If you're in somewhere where it's not required, you do what you do beyond what is expected of you, and then you'll have that influence with people. I don't want to pursue knowledge only because the law says I have to. I want to pursue knowledge because I'm becoming a better operator. You know. So so that's what I'm getting to today, and some things that to take away, or some final takeaways, is that boiler operator licensing is not universal. Requirements vary by state and local jurisdiction. Historic licensing information may not reflect current requirements. Reciprocity is not automatic. Um, your exam formats and eligibility requirements may vary. Um, you know, and just some few other things that I've talked about tonight, um, or today. Um, at the end of the day, becoming a boiler operator is about more than passing an examination or putting another credential behind your name. We're talking about operating equipment that works with high pressure, high temperatures, pressure, combustion, water, steam, and tremendous amounts of stored energy. That requires knowledge. It requires experience. It requires attention to detail. And most importantly, it requires respect for the equipment and the responsibility that comes along with operating it. Whether your jurisdiction requires a license or not, the goal should always be the same. Become the most knowledgeable, safe, dependable, and professional operator you can be. And, with all that is education plus hands on experience plus examination plus continued learning equals professional growth. If you have found value in today's episode, make sure you like, share, follow, and subscribe to the H2O Hustle podcast. Whether you're working in water treatment, wastewater treatment, steam production, boiler operations, or you're just beginning your journey in the utility industry, we're going to keep learning, growing, and getting better together. This is H2O Hustle, where we approach the work, the journey, and the growth with passion, purpose, and precision. Until next time, stay safe, keep learning, and keep hustling.